and welcome to Rising. We've got a great show for you today. There is some big news on the Israel front this morning. 3 European nations have come out recognizing the state of Palestine. Let's watch.
Last month I stood on these same steps with Prime Minister Sanchez of Spain, and we said that the point of recognizing the state of Palestine was coming closer. That point has now arrived. Today, Ireland, Norway and Spain are announcing that we recognize the state of Palestine. Each of us will now undertake whatever national steps are necessary to give effect to that decision. In the lead up to today's announcement, I've spoken with a number of other leaders and counterparts, and I'm confident that further countries will join us in taking this important step in the coming weeks.
Although scores of countries have recognized Palestinian statehood, the closely coordinated announcement of 3 Western nations carried weight amid the growing toll of Israel's 8-month-long offensive into Gaza. It's also notable that Norway was among the 3 nations as it brokered the ultimately failed 1993 Oslo Accords, when Palestinians came a whisper away from a 2-state solution. This recognition defies what the U.S. has been asking for and leaves many questions about the role the U.S. might play when the Israeli offensive stops. We will talk about all of that shortly.
This flies in the face of what Israel believes. This tape aired on Israeli television the other night, revealing a secret recording where Defense Minister Yoav Gallant says there will never be a Palestinian state. Let's watch.
אנחנו מפרסמים מערב התבטאות מעניינת מאוד של שר הביטחון יואב גלנט. בהקלטה שאנחנו מביאים הערב, גלנט אומר, עזבו את ההצהרות של האמריקאים. הם מבינים שלא תהיה רשות פלסטינית ברצועת עזה, ושגם לא תהיה מדינה פלסטינית באף ממשלה. בואי נשמע את הדברים.
עכשיו האמריקאים, זה לא איזה גוף שאי אפשר להזיז אותו. זה שהם רוצים דבר מסוים כי הוא נוח להם. הם כבר מדברים אחרת. הם כבר מבינים את הקו שלנו. הם כבר מבינים שרשות פלסטינית לא תהיה בעזה, ומדינה פלסטינית לא תהיה. תאמינו לי, עזבו את ההצהרות, הם מבינים שלא תוקם, לא עם הממשלה הזאת ולא עם ממשלה אחרת, לא תוקם מדינה פלסטינית, כי ישראל לא יכולה להרשות לעצמה את זה. זה לא יקרה.
As Israel becomes increasingly isolated on the world stage, Netanyahu has taken to the U.S. airwaves to get his message out.
The UN organizations that are dominated by Hamas in Gaza is giving false information, as is Hamas itself. And people believe these numbers. The other day they came and said, well, you know, it's about 35,000 who are killed, but 10,000 of those we said are women and children. Now we can't say that. We don't know who they are.
Well, whatever the numbers are, it's too many.
In the meantime, the lie circles. Well, look, yes, 1 is too many, but the reason they're there, the reason we have civilian casualties at all is because Hamas is preventing them from leaving. I want a civilian administration that is run by Gazans who are neither Hamas nor committed to our destruction.
So you're taking it off the table.
The third thing that we'll need to do is... No, I'm not. I'm putting it on the table, on the contrary. No, that's not
I'm saying you're taking off an Israeli occupation of Gaza. You're taking off the table an Israeli occupation.
If you mean resettling Gaza, yeah, it was never in the cards, and I said so openly, and some of my constituents are not happy about it, but that's my position.
Now, the situation in Gaza becomes more dire every day. The Pentagon says none of the aid unloaded from the U.S. Pier, built with taxpayer money, at least $320 million of that money, has gone where it was supposed to go. Let's listen.
Am I accurate to say zero has been delivered to the people of Gaza so far?
You'd have to check with the World Food Program. I know that aid is getting in, but it's not accurate that no aid has been delivered. You know, we've been doing airdrops. We've been helping to facilitate aid coming over the land crossings. But the Causeway has been able to get over 569 metric tons of aid into Gaza for onward delivery. So, yes, very shortly, I think you'll see aid starting to be delivered.
That has been delivered, right? As of today?
As of today, I do not believe so.
Okay. And is Israel, you said Israel is cooperating on this, trying to help, but it seems from what you said, the desperation of people created security issues for the distribution of aid from the assembly area, and that desperation is related to the fact that Israel is shutting down aid routes, right?
So we're shifting from questions to editorializing. I'm going to go ahead and go to somebody else. Let's go to Tom Watkins, The National.
Here to unpack all of this with us is Hill columnist Niall Stanich. Welcome back, Niall. It's always a pleasure.
Good to be with you.
All right, let's start at the top here. Of what significance is the fact that we have 3 Western nations coming out in this format saying that they're recognizing Palestine as a state?
I think there's big significance to that. I think in and of itself it is an important move. It underlines or underscores the fact that there is a Palestinian nation waiting to be recognized, but it also shows 2 things. One is the increasing isolation of Israel and, of course, its ally, the United States, in relation to that. The other point is, of course, the criticism from Israel or from the right is, well, this is rewarding terrorism. It's not, in my view, rewarding terrorism. It's actually the fact that there is a backlash by these Western European countries at the idea that Israel is trying to eliminate the notion of a Palestinian nation or a Palestinian state. And I think that's why there has been that point of emphasis in this announcement.
Is it not the Israeli position, though, that the Palestinians can have a state, or we can move toward a Palestinian state, just not one that is run by Hamas, and until Hamas is eliminated or until there's an agreement that that would not be the case, they're unwilling to do it?
So 2 things. I don't honestly think it is the case that the Israeli position is there can be a Palestinian state. Netanyahu and many of his cabinet ministers are actually opposed to what is called a 2-state solution. Now, in relation to Gaza and how it will be governed after the assault ends, that obviously is a vexing topic in Israeli politics, and there are divisions within the cabinet about it. The issue that I think can't be avoided is, why would the people of Gaza give any form of allegiance or acknowledge the authority of an administration that has the backing of Israel? That seems unlikely. I don't see how you can say to people, you can have a state of which we'll decide who the government is. That doesn't seem plausible to me.
Well, if the people attacking them are saying you can have that government or you can continue losing a war to us where we're massacring your people by the thousands.
And that's the problem, right? What you just described is using starvation, denial of medical aid, and outright violence as a weapon of war in a way that is in violation of international law, which is precisely why we now have these ICC warrants out for both Netanyahu and Gallant, who was there just in the clip that we played saying that he opposes a 2-state solution, right? So I think there was a real credibility issue. We were talking about this just a few weeks ago when the U.S. again chose to vote against recognizing Palestine as a state in the UN, and the rationale that the UN representative that the office put out was, of course, the United States, we support a 2-state solution, but we only support a 2-state solution in the right context where there are 2 parties that are in good faith willing to come to a negotiation, basically saying we don't support a 2-state solution as long as Hamas is the government of Gaza. And that's not even getting into the questions of Netanyahu and Israel's choice to prop up Hamas over more moderate forms of government like the Palestinian Authority that we see in the West Bank. Let's move on and talk a little bit about what's been going on the ground as well. Following in advance of the news on Monday that these ICC warrants were being pursued, Netanyahu had come out weeks ago and said that if this were to happen, that he would retaliate on not the people of Gaza, the people of the West Bank, which is not run by Hamas, a separate entity altogether. And in the last few days, we have seen some behavior that could be described as that kind of retaliation. There were some sniper attacks in Jenin that killed a couple of young children leaving school, a doctor as well, and I think a couple of others. There was also this incident that happened earlier this week in Jerusalem where the AP camera that had a long shot of Gaza was taken down. It was later reinstated. That was such a bold move against Western notions of press freedom and press integrity that even Netanyahu's opposition objected to that news, and the camera got reinstated. What do you make of what's going on in terms of the reaction to these ICC warrants?
So firstly, as far as the West Bank is concerned, there have been those sniper attacks. There have also been Israeli airstrikes in the West Bank, which had been somewhat of a rarity, even despite the obviously lower level conflict in the West Bank. And it's not lower by all that much. So that is significant in itself. In terms of the reaction, it's no surprise that Israel has rejected these ICC preliminary warrants, or the process of seeking warrants. I mean, Israel does not recognize the ICC. It will obviously try to use this kind of jiu-jitsu to its own defense, in a sense, trying to unite an Israel that is very divided in opposition to this ICC move. There is, as you and I have spoken about before, the other element in this, which is Benjamin Netanyahu's personal motivation to keep this conflict going for reasons unrelated to the core issues of the conflict. Namely, he's accused of bribery and corruption. That trial would get underway if he was ousted from power. That means he has an interest in there not being an election.
Let's not gloss over a detail I thought was interesting. This $320 million floating pier that the U.S. built is now being used to supply exactly zero aid to Gaza because of the conditions. The United Nations says it's not safe to use it. Great use of American tax dollars, or not even be able to take advantage of this. What's going on here?
Yeah, and I think when the pier was being constructed, there was this concern that was going to be humanitarian theater from the jump, because there are all of these gates, all of these entry points into Gaza that are
shovel-ready product.
By
That's all
Israel.
It is.
Right. So if Israel is our ally and they control all of these entry points into Gaza, why on earth would it be the case that you needed to build a new entry point by water if your ally is cooperating with you in delivering the necessary aid? And I think I'd love to get you to respond, because that was some of the tension that was coming out in that Jake Tapper interview with Netanyahu. So Tapper actually asked Netanyahu this at the end of the interview. He says, well, why are you doing so much Western press when you haven't sat down for a press in Israel? And I think over a year. Yet he's done, I think, multiple Western outlets in just the last week. And, he doesn't answer it this way, but I do think there's an argument that he is helping to construct a narrative, as you saw in that brief clip, that Israel is doing everything that it can, that there isn't, in fact, starvation that's happening at the time. He argued that in contradiction to numerous humanitarian authorities, and that Israel is facilitating the delivery of aid, despite clear facts that we're just learning about this pier. So what did you make of that interview?
So I think it's all intertwined together for some of those reasons that you both outline. The issue of the pier, I think, is just this window into the contortions of American policy here, generally speaking. Because remember, whenever that State Department report came out, about 10 days ago or so, there was this incredibly bizarre and convoluted sentence about how Israel wasn't really letting aid in, but it wasn't restricting it in a way that would legally prevent America from sending them more military aid, etc. The pier is just the obvious rebuttal to the government's own argument. If Israel isn't restricting aid, why are we spending $320 million to build a temporary pier? And there's, of course, potentially some risk to the personnel involved in building that pier, even though the American government is at great pains to say, well, they're not going to be in harm's way.
But look,
we'll see about that.
Jose Andres,
deliverers.
Look,
absolutely.
There are friendly fire incidents happening. I would say, why are we doing this even in the case that Israel makes it perfectly easy to bring in aid this way?
And from the other side, it stokes suspicion that, in fact, that facility is ultimately going to be used for military rather than aid purposes too. So
and one other interesting point in that interview was that Netanyahu seemed to very firmly say that resettling Gaza by Israel was not on the cards. Jake Tapper pushed him, is that off the table? Netanyahu's like, yeah, it was never really on the table. That also flies in the face of some other statements and conferences that have been attended by over a dozen members of Netanyahu's own cabinet. So what do you make of that? Is that a shift in position that perhaps is a response to all of the negative kind of global PR that Israel is getting? Is that kind of a bad faith kind of comment from Netanyahu that he doesn't really believe and that we shouldn't really trust? Or is this Netanyahu saying, okay, I'm going to pick my battles, and sure, I'm willing to firmly say, of all the things we're doing, we're not going to resettle physically with Israeli Gaza?
What I think really is, amid all the blood and horror of what's going on here, semantics are also very important. What does he mean by resettlement? Because that can be interpreted as, does he mean he's not going to send actual Israeli citizens to build their homes in Gaza, but he's still open to some form of Israeli military rule over native Gazans. I mean, I suspect that could be what he means. The conference that you're talking about, which I think was back in January, caused a whole huge stir because so many cabinet ministers were at a conference which called for the voluntary migration, in other words, displacement of the Palestinian people. Obviously, that is a pretty extreme position and not one that the United States ostensibly supports.
Yeah.
Niall, thank you so much for
Thank
joining
you.
us. We really appreciate it. More Rising right after this.